Welcome to the F4 podcast, where your hosts, Brian, Brooke, Charles, and Vanessa, discuss all things faith, family, friends, and fitness. What is F4? Sometimes it's a glimpse into how we navigate the world, and sometimes it's a deep dive into how we handle the four main areas of our lives. If you want to have a healthier relationship with God, family, friends, and yourself, this podcast is for you. Thank you for joining us as we unpack this episode. Hi, welcome to episode 27 of the F4 podcast. My name is Vanessa Giddens, and I'm joined by the rest of our F4 hosts, my husband Charles, and our wonderful friends, Brian and Brooke Marston. I want to thank you guys for listening and watching our podcast. We're available on all of the listening platforms, and if you could like and follow us on Instagram, that would be great. And we're also available for your viewing pleasure on YouTube. If you would like to be a sponsor of the podcast, you can message us on Instagram, Facebook, or via email at f4ncpodcast@gmail.com. So those of you that have known us for a while or have been listening to us know that we are all very much involved in Connection Valley Church. Brian is our lead pastor. Brooke is our family ministries director. Charles is our CV Kids and preteens director. And I volunteer. What, were you going to correct me?
Nope.
Did I mess up? Okay. I volunteer pretty much every Sunday on a very regular basis, as do 4 of our 5 collective children. And I say all of that as a backdrop for an experience that we all recently shared through the church. And now I'll rewind back to earlier this summer. Charles and I were sitting at this table. It was turned the other way, but we were sitting at this table having a conversation. And I finally just stopped him and I said, just stop, wait. Before we go any farther, I can't take it anymore. I have to tell you something. I have to tell my story, like publicly. And Charles listened to me that night, and I think it was within a week, you and I were taking a walk and discussing things instead of working out.
It was a good day.
It was a good day. And then within a couple of days, Brian had approached me with a date to participate in an onstage interview at church where I could tell my story. And I did. And it was hard and it was weird. And I felt both drained and invigorated all at the same time. It's important to note it's something I had been trying to pray it away for like months. I had really, really been trying to pray it away, but it was something that I felt like God was really pushing me to do. Push, maybe not the right word, but He kept it there in front of me and I couldn't ignore it anymore. So I did tell the story, and I'm not going to get into my whole story here on this platform. We will put a link to the interview from Connection Valley Church in the show notes if anyone is interested in going and listening to my story. But the point of this podcast is the importance of you sharing your story. And I really just felt like letting you guys know what I needed to do, and it was great to get your help in that process. And now I want to know how you felt when I first came to you guys and said, I want to do this.
I think Charles should start because you talked to him about it first.
Yeah, so when she says we were having a conversation at the dinner table and she just stopped me, we weren't having a conversation about any of this. It was like some random conversation, and she just like time out the she's like, wait, I need to tell you something. I'm like, oh no. And that's what she said. It was completely off topic. It had nothing to do with what we were discussing. I was like, okay. So when you told me that, I was really surprised. And I was surprised because it took so long for you to tell anybody your story. We've been married, it'll be 25 years next month. 2 weeks. 2 weeks will be 25 years. And really up until 23 years, 24 years, I guess. No, it was probably 23 or 22 years ago when she originally told you guys her story.
It was really, well, she really opened up in 2020.
Okay, so almost 4 years ago. 4 years. Okay, sorry, 4 years ago. So it took our entire marriage until 4 years ago for her to actually say anything to anybody. So I was super surprised that we went for the first 20 years of our marriage to not saying anything at all about her background and her story to going, oh, well, 4 years ago I shared this with our best friends, and now I'm going to share it publicly, and I'm not going to worry about it. I was like...
It's not that I didn't worry about it.
Yeah, I mean... So I was excited. I was scared, both for you, not for me, but for you. I wanted you to get it out, but I knew it was going to be hard for you to do. But I also was really proud of you. I mean, I remember walking out of that conversation going, "Wow, I really hope you follow through this," because I was really proud that you were taking that step. So that was what I initially thought. Yeah.
I guess I can go next because she told me next.
Yeah, you were second.
Yeah. So I think for me, when you came, it's kind of in two parts. When you shared the story with us 4 years ago, you really didn't go into the detail that you did this time. So you just kind of scratched the surface, just kind of said, hey, this is some of what happened. For me, that was a lot more of an emotional experience just because I didn't know. That was, 4 years ago was completely, it was, I don't want to say shocking, and the only reason that I use the word shocking is just I had no idea, right? Like you didn't give there were no signs of, you had not leaked a peep of it. Like it was stealed away really good, and there was no evidence like, hey, I wonder why she acts funny about this, or that's different, most people don't. There was none of that. So it was shocking only because you had done such a good job of hiding it or keeping it tucked away 4 years ago. So at that point, I would say that when I prayed for you, that was part of my prayer for you, was that you would find healing. So when you brought it up this last time, and I'm not a poker and a prodder, so I'm not going to be like, hey, every day, so how are you with this thing? It just was something that privately I would pray for you about. So when you brought it up back this summer, I wasn't surprised. A little bit surprised maybe at the speed of it. I don't have the length of relationship with her that you do, but knowing that it had been something that had been kept so to yourself for so long, I was a little bit surprised that it was this soon. But I wasn't surprised because, like I said, I had been praying that you would find some healing. So again, excited is not the right word because
I understand.
It's not the right word, but I was excited in the sense that I felt like it would be a really good step and that healing would be part of the process. And so I was glad that you were being obedient, especially when you said it was something that you had been trying to pray away. That to me was much more, it made it even more evident, there was even more evidence that this was the step that needed to be taken. So I knew it would be hard for you, but I've been around you enough that I knew you would be able to handle the challenging part of that. I think from a friendship side, I wanted to be supportive in a way that was good. And probably if I'm thinking about other feelings, I maybe felt like I felt a little inadequate to be able to be what you needed for support. But I figured we'd face that when we got there. I would do the best I could, but I was proud of you and excited for the healing that I felt like this would be kind of a step towards. So
You were not inadequate at all.
Well,
Not at all.
I don't know. Well,
Not at all. Okay.
Yeah, hearing what you said 4 years ago when we were at, is that not Triad Park? It's
she was in our house
Yeah.
when she
well,
shared
that was
that.
that.
Was it
Then
your
there's
kitchen table?
also an occasion at the park. We were working out. It wasn't the High Point Athletic Complex. It's the one with the memorials.
Yeah, Triad Park.
Triad Park. And there was also a conversation that day that I remember pretty explicitly. And I don't know if it was because I was bringing something to you in light of what you had shared with us. Sometimes the memory gets a little foggy. But what I do remember, when I became aware of what you had shared with Brooke earlier this summer, is I felt this prompting from the Holy Spirit that you needed to be able to have the opportunity to share your story sooner rather than later. You know, kind of like the idea of you strike while the iron's hot. And I knew for you, it took a lot of courage to get to that point, because you were an expert in hiding. Like, you were really good at it. And the fact that you were taking down that mask and saying, I'm going to step out of this dark, isolated, lonely, and painful place and bring light to it. I wanted to give you that opportunity when you said it's time. So that's why I approached you so quickly and said, I have a date. And for me, like, I thought about what Paul wrote about his thorn in the flesh, because I know when you hide stuff, or that, it's not that you were hiding because you had done something wrong, but you're hiding because it felt shameful. It felt, there's a lot of things you felt just in hearing what you said back when you were sharing your story publicly, that when you said, I want to do this, I knew God's power would be made known in your weakness. And so I actually have the scripture in front of me, don't have it memorized, but Paul wrote this about his thorn in the flesh that he wanted to pray away. In 2 Corinthians 12, verses 8 through 10, he said, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in your weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, I delight in hardships, and in insults, and persecutions, and difficulties, because when I'm weak, I'm strong. And so that's why I was so inclined to have you tell your story.
And I think that scripture actually very much encapsulates where I was, because for so long, for so much of my life, it really, I don't know that it was hiding as much as it was, I'm not a victim. I guess I am to a degree, but I don't want that to be me. I'm not going to live that life. I don't want people
That's not your identity.
Right. I don't want people to see me that way. Mm-hmm. But if it can be presented in such a way that this is what God is doing with it, and maybe I don't even know what God is doing with it, but I can still take my cues from Jesus and offer forgiveness and rest in that. So that's very applicable. Yeah. So, and I appreciate all of you so much for everything that you did and that you continue to do, and who you are.
I think it speaks to community, because I got to be honest, and this is not just to blow smoke on the other side of the table, because it's really not, but I don't think you would have been in that position if you didn't have both of them surrounding you, and us, but surrounding you during this time period for the last 13 years, but really the last couple years that you've kind of put that out there so they actually knew kind of some of the stuff that happened.
Yeah.
I think if that was a normal situation and a normal friendship, maybe it would have ended up the same way. I don't know. I don't feel like it probably would have, which to me speaks to the value of being a community with people that love you and that you are doing life with. Because it makes some of those decisions like you had to make, to me, easier to know at least there were 3 other people that were going to love you no matter what. Yeah.
And I didn't do any research on the power or benefit of sharing your story before I came to you guys, but I did do a little bit when I knew we were going to be talking about it on this podcast. And it seems that there are 4 general benefits that everybody from psychologists, personal mentors, self-help authors, life coaches, all of these people seem to kind of, even religious leaders, people seem to kind of rest on these 4 beliefs that sharing your story has benefits. And the first reminds me of an African proverb. And the African proverb is, until the lion tells the story, the hunt will always glorify the hunter. Just take that and think about it for a minute. And I hope that you guys can process that. And I think science says it a little bit differently. Emotional, autobiographical storytelling can be a path to truly owning your story. Further, by giving it away, you can use your own journey as a means to help others on theirs. And that's from a Psychology Today article called Resilience and the Benefits of Sharing Your Story. And it's by Sherry Hamby, PhD. It's from September of 2013, so way back before a lot of things happened. But I've always said words are powerful. We were just talking about that, 20 minutes ago in a different context. But it's amazing to think that we can choose to use our words even when they're words that depict something that's not pleasant, something that's very painful. But it's amazing that our words can have a positive power in people's lives, and in turn, even a positive power in our own lives because of that. And just as a little side note, the roar of a lion can carry up to 5 miles from its point of origin. I think that's pretty impressive. Okay. So I wanted us to take a few minutes to talk about the importance of differing viewpoints, why it might be important to hear the story from the side of the lion, to hear the lion side of the story, to hear viewpoints from people who have been on the other side of things that maybe are a little taboo or difficult to talk about. And Brian, you already shared a great part of scripture about praying things away. And if there are any other points of scripture that you guys have that lead to the positive aspects of sharing your story. And obviously the Gospels are, the big grand idea there, but maybe specific points.
Yeah, I was hit by Romans 8:28 as I thought about this, where Paul writes, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." And I was thinking about your story in particular because the devil, he is hunting us. He's actually described as a lion, which is a little bit ironic in this case, but he is prowling and looking for weakness and looking to keep us trapped in the agreements we've made with lies from our past. And I imagine, based on just what you've already shared about your story, he was trying to work double, triple, quadruple time on you to keep you quiet. And I feel like when you came out and said, look, I need to tell my story, it was a way for God to take what Satan intended to use for evil, to hold you down, to suffocate you. And it was like he no longer had victory, and you had your own war. And in that moment, it was just like, okay, what Satan intended for evil, like talking about Joseph for here for a second, with his brothers, God is used for good. And so for me, I've seen God bring good out of it. And now with you functioning like a lion on the evil lion, almost like a Simba. What's the bad lion's name?
Scar.
Scar. I should not forget that. Simba and Scar. It really is like the hunted has become the hunter.
I think you said a lot of things before, so going back to some of what you talked about, having the different perspectives. I think one of the things that makes, and you already spoke to community and the value of community, I think that part of, as the body of Christ, as believers who are connected to God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit, the Holy Trinity, we show who God is by the unity that we have within our community. And so when we hide our stories or when we don't share that, people can't really know us. And without being known, without knowing and without being known, you can't really have unity. It's a facade. It's all false. And so I think when people share their stories, even the parts that are unpleasant, the parts that are painful, the parts that have left wounds, the way that others are able to step in and provide comfort or support, but also to see you as human. I think when we don't share our stories, we're less human and we're less connected to each other. It's when we're vulnerable. It's when we say, this is who I am, all the ugly parts too, the parts that I think are not acceptable. If we don't ever expose those, we don't ever really experience true unity, and we can't really show people around us who God is. So it's as strange as it is, it's paradox. I don't know if that's the right word, but it's counterintuitive. It's like the thing that you think is going to keep you from unity is actually the thing that paves the way for unity. And we're so afraid of the lack of connectivity that we keep back the thing that would actually give us what it is that we desire the most. So I think that's kind of and in terms of roaring, you're able to roar even louder when you see, like, yes, now we're more you're not Katy Perry. When you see, like, I'm yes, the thing I wanted I now have, because the thing I thought would keep me from it is actually the thing that, I don't know, does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that, because after that service, it was so weird. People were coming up to me and thanking me. And I'm like, why are you thanking me for talking about all that awful stuff?
Yeah.
But people did. People thanked me. A woman I had not officially met at that point hugged me. And it was weird.
It was weird. It was.
Really weird. People came up to me weeks following that weren't there, that watched the service online, and hugged me. And I'm like, hey, okay, this is a weird greeting from you. And then they would say, I watched your service, I watched your message. And so, yes, it was not the effect that I anticipated on any level. And it was a little weird.
Well, yeah, I mean, you said before you didn't want to be seen as a victim. You didn't want that. It was the thing that created the wall. You take the wall down, And instead of people seeing you in that light, it's like, come here, let me hug you, let me be close to you, because you've put yourself out there in this way.
Yeah, it was weird.
Yeah. I don't have a lot other than what's already been said. It's really good stuff. I think, the biggest thing really is just it allows us, when you hear the other side of the story, right? And we were talking about this the other night, because some of these questions and the way Vanessa writes is a little bit over my head sometimes. It's kind of funny. But we were having a conversation so I could get some clarifying understanding of what she meant. I think really when you think about hearing, the other side of the story from the lion's perspective, if you only see one part of the story seems a certain way, and it's very black and white, and this is how it is. And in your case, it could be, this is all the negative. Look how horrible this is. Look at this is gigantically unfair and all the things that happen to you. But then when you hear the lion story or your story, you're like, okay, yeah, it's still unfair. That didn't change this side of the story, but what it does change is it changes how I relate to you. It changes the amount of empathy that I can extend. It changes my thought and my assumptions of what I thought I would be like on the other side of a story with someone who had gone through what you went through, to the point where I'm like, okay, that's challenging how I deal with things. You being able to get past something. Okay, hearing you say that, okay, that gives me the opportunity to say, okay, if she can do that, then I can probably do the same thing. And it struck me, and there were some things we had in small group after that. I was like, oh, I didn't even think about any of that stuff until right this second. Like, I've been holding on to this, and I shouldn't have been holding on to that. My wife was able to give this up already, and I haven't been able to.
So it's like her thoughts and her processing her thoughts and feelings in that setting freed you up to do the same.
Yeah. And I think if you don't hear the other side of the story, if I would have been stuck, you telling your story then and listening to that on stage, although I know you in a way no one else does, you telling that story on stage really was a different way for me to hear it.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
To go, oh, okay, I got to process some things differently. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And it would be very easy for me to hang on to things.
So like her willingness to forgive what she's been through, what happened to her, then gives you permission to do the same.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, and I think it works the same way with other people too, not just people that you're that close to, right? I mean, because you hear stories all the time and you get very angry and very upset until you hear the other side of that, and then you're like, oh. Like Corrie ten Boom comes to mind, like, oh, God, I couldn't do it. But then listening to her, like, oh, okay, I need to think about this differently.
All right, so the second point, the second benefit is that sharing our stories helps us to find our voice and open the door for other people to experience freedom in finding theirs. Psychologically, thinking of our life as a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, as yet unwritten. Now that song is in my head. But it helps us to think about our life events, even the bad ones, and how they have possibly helped us on our journey to becoming the person that we want to be. And our stories, when they include God's redemption in our lives because of who He is, can empower others to overcome through faith and giving their past and current circumstances over to God. And I read an article, Youth with a Mission in Louisville. They have a pretty great website, actually. I don't know how much you guys know about them, but...
Well, they have all kinds of books and stuff that they publish, so a lot of... Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I'm familiar with some of the stuff that they do.
I was not until I went down the rabbit hole. Yeah, I went down the rabbit hole. But why your story is important and should be shared. a young woman shared part of her testimony in a group setting that she hadn't ever been shared in a group setting before, and learned that the entire small group that she was talking with had struggled with the exact same thing. And one girl voiced that she thought the enemy had lied to her for years, telling her she was the only one, but that it was the vulnerability of one person's story that paved the way for freedom. So, along the lines of paving the way, did you guys know that females in a pride of lions typically give birth at the same time? This way, the cubs grow up together and with the support of the entire pride. Okay, so now, that in mind, discuss your experiences with the idea of people finding their voice and experiencing personal freedom through the stories of others.
I had this experience this past Tuesday night in a small group I'm leading called Untangle Your Emotions. And one of the participants was part of our adult kid parenting small group back 2 years ago. And they said that their wife had drugged them to that group. They didn't want to be a part of it. They were not looking forward to it. And they came because their wife was insistent. I'm really trying not to say this person's name.
You can just say his because it's a
His.
he.
It is a he. Yes. Yes. It's a man.
With a wife. You can say that.
With a wife. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm glad you're here to fill in the gaps.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not calling him them anymore. He came to the group this past Tuesday, and he started talking about how one of the things that really made him go, I love my church, is sitting in that group. And he said, and I began to hear how screwed up everybody else's kids were. And he said, I'm not alone. And I say that because while it strikes me as funny, what he had thought erroneously is that he was the only one that was struggling as a parent. And to sit with other parents who were saying, man, I'm really struggling parenting my adult kids or my teenage kids, and I really need insight, I need advice, I need help, I need support. That was a game changer for his connection, not only just with people, but also with God. And I've watched this man change to where he is kind of it looks gruff and tough, but he's a teddy bear. And it's awesome because I think he's going to do some big things as a result of people sharing and being open in community. So yeah, I think it's important.
It's good stuff.
Mm-hmm. And I think, you kind of alluded to it in the beginning, or maybe Brian mentioned, because when you shared your story, you talked about shame. And I think that when you feel alone, shame is, that really comes into play because it's like, something's wrong with me. Mm-hmm. That is the story that begins to be told. And so when you share and you find that you're not the only one, then you're like, well, okay, maybe there is something wrong with me, but it's wrong with everybody. So I don't have to be embarrassed about this part of me that's not ideal, that isn't picture perfect or whatever. And so then you can actually ask questions of other people. How do you not feel this way? Like, what are steps that I can take? What are some helpful to get out of those feelings that can be overwhelming? But if you're unwilling to admit it or talk about it or share it, then you never know that you're not the only one. You you carry around that feeling that you are in it by yourself, and you're going to have to figure it out on your own, which is isolating, and most people are not their most powerful when they're isolated.
No. I think kind of to Brian's point, realizing you're not alone. That's the first thing I wrote when I looked at that question. I'm like, okay, realizing I'm not the only person there who's experienced X, Y, Z, whatever. You can name it. It doesn't matter what's happened. Whatever's happened to you, you're not the only one that's ever happened to.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to say you're not that unique. And I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just it's thousands of years of human history and what we've gone through says there's no way you can be the only person that's experienced this. You just can't. There's only so many experiences that are out there, and likelihood of you experiencing something someone else has is just the case. I mean, I think, our testimony is important for other people. It's important for us to hear other people's testimony for the same reason. To know you're not alone, to be inspired. When I hear somebody that's overcome something with the help of God, with the help of, their community, with whatever, I'm like, oh, that's inspiring. How that's inspiring me. How do I get that same thing? Do I pray about it? Do I go to talk to somebody about it? But that then strengthens my belief and my hope in Jesus to go, oh, okay, this person's gotten through it. I can get through it too. I just have to do something different. But I think the biggest thing, drawing inspiration from others, but really realizing you're not alone in situations is just massive in stories.
And I really love the animal facts that you keep throwing in, because I do think that it's so beautiful that God's creation speaks to what we need. We have the same creator, even though we're made differently. Lions are animals, they're not people. Yet there's a glimpse, the mark of the creator is on them. And so how beautiful that he would do something like that, orchestrate birth patterns in lions to show the value of community, that parents need each other, and kids need their own parents, but also other people's parents. Like that there's a value of community and a value of support that is not just needed with humans. There are other, in the animal kingdom that also benefit from that. And I just think that's pretty cool.
I do too. And I like the idea of all of the cubs, even though they're from different mothers, they're going to have experiences that are different. And one of the problems that I have with that sort of victim mentality that people can clothe themselves with and walk around with is they might share their story with people who have been through similar circumstances. And then they continue to stay in these patterns because that's what they see around them with the people that they've shared with, as opposed to, I think there are certainly programs for people that are necessary and wonderful and beneficial. But then, just like third story. Well, how many stories? I'm talking about Suzanne. How many? She was the last one in the series, right? Just like the another story in that series where she took the necessary steps to overcome what she was going through, and then she took it out away from that and shared publicly. And I think it's important to know that not everybody is going to go through the exact same thing, but everybody's going to have different problems that they're dealing with, and we can still go to the community even though they might not have exactly the same experiences. We're going to benefit more once we're ready to take that step. We're going to benefit more from the other cubs and the other lionesses than just staying in this small group of people with our victim coats or whatever.
Yeah.
So I agree, it's pretty cool. All right, so now I want to talk about, were you done?
Yeah.
Okay. Now I want to talk about the idea of reaffirming your values by sharing your story. Writing has always been a way for me to bring clarity to emotional events, to begin to process things that I'm going through. And it must be because I've placed a particular importance on the situation or behaviors of others, and they either coincide or conflict with behaviors that are valuable to me. So the act of vulnerably telling my story forced me to kind of bring those values and beliefs into laser sharp focus so that I could convey as much of what I felt was relevant history and emotion as possible in, you know, we were talking about decades of stuff in, I guess we went long, but in
30,
less than an
30,
hour.
40 minutes.
Less than an hour. And
We were not long compared to the other stories.
Because you were laser focused with
Yep.
your.
I like it.
But so I want to talk about how by sharing our stories, we can either reaffirm or disaffirm our values and maybe learn to place more emphasis on certain things that we do hold valuable. And then, did you know that in darkness, a lion can see approximately 8 times better than a human being? Okay. So now we can discuss what we think about the possibility of sharing your story as a means to reaffirm or even disaffirm your values.
Yeah, I'm not going first this time. So
Well, I think the thing for me, this is pretty simple. I think words are powerful, and we can all be careless with our words, right? But I think that when you know you're going to be in front of people, there is a care that you give to the words that you use that's different maybe than the care that you would give to words that you were speaking around a dinner table with your family or friends. And so for me, getting up in front of people or being in a position where I'm sharing something that this is that close to my heart, I want to be much more careful with the word choice. And I think that piece of it causes me to then have those arguments inside of my head. Do I really believe this? Is this really true? Is this something that I've told myself? But when it cuts it, because when you say something out loud, it's different than when you say something in your head. You can spin something in your head, and then the minute it comes out, you're like, well, that sounds really dumb now that I say it out loud. Why was I afraid of that? Or, okay, that's actually, yes, I really do believe that. Once I hear my voice say the things, then it solidifies. Yes, that is exactly what I believe. Or, oops, no, I didn't mean it. I thought I meant it until I heard myself say it. And so I think when you tell your story, I think that's what happens. The things that we believe about God to be true. Like, I believe that, God's going to walk with me no matter what I face. That the Lord is my shepherd. I have everything I need, even though I walk through, this dark valley. He's there. And I can say that to myself in my head, but the minute that I begin to share my story and share those things out loud, I have to come face to face with, do I really believe that? Or is it just something that I tell myself or something that I say? And so I think when you have the courage to step out and share the things that feel vulnerable, that don't feel safe. It doesn't feel safe to share pain. It doesn't feel safe to share things that you've wanted to keep back because you don't know how people are going to perceive you. It doesn't feel safe to share things that might make someone else look bad, and that's not the point of the story, So it takes a lot of courage, I think, to get to the point where you say those things out loud. And I think when you have the courage and then it solidifies what you do believe or you have believed, that you walk away from it even more empowered because you took the step of saying it out loud. And I think it solidifies, yes, I do believe this. So the next time I face something that's challenging, the next time I face something that is painful, the next time I face something that makes me feel alone or makes me feel shame, I have history to look back. I can point back to this moment and say, no, I really do believe that. And I've seen God be faithful in that. So he's going to be faithful again. I believe he's going to be faithful again. I don't think he was just faithful that one time. So for me, that's what came to mind when you posed that question or that thought. just that the care given to words is more when you know people are going to be listening to you, and then just the courage that takes and how that solidifies. Hopefully solidifies those beliefs. But if you have erroneous beliefs that need tearing down, whether it's the lies of I'm the only one and nobody's gonna accept me and those things, then you can throw those beliefs away because you don't need to carry those on. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, I think similar fashion. Recently, I was given the opportunity to sit with someone not in a church and answer questions, right? And preparing for that conversation, kind of knowing some of the things that possibly were going to come up, forced me to sit down and think about what I really believed, right? And it's like, do I really believe this? Do I not believe this? How am I going to answer this question really from the heart and from a soul standpoint? Like, is this truly what I'm about? And I think in a way, when you share your stories, it reaffirms that. It can, if you really think about it, to your point, if you're careful with your words. I think the other thing that it does, when you talked about disaffirmation, and we talked about this briefly, I think, and it's not even necessarily about someone sharing a story, but an ethical dilemma or something that comes up. When you hear it, you think, oh, well, I'm better than that. I don't do that. And I'll give you an example. Something years ago that came up when I was in school. Oh, this person's cheating on an assignment, right? And it wasn't necessarily phrased that way, although it kind of was. And I'm like, well, I would never do that. And then I was forced to reevaluate my beliefs, my values, what I thought I was doing, and having to reassess my inner beliefs to go, oh, wait a minute. Wait, okay, that story caused me to reflect on my own situation and go, okay, I've got a problem here. Like, I've got a gap that I didn't see, like a blind spot that I didn't understand that I had, that had I not heard that story, I may not have ever processed differently. And I think hearing people's stories can also disaffirm your belief value or point out things that you need to get squared away, whether you want them to or not. You know, and it's not like I walk around going, oh, I'm morally superior to everybody, but there are certain things in my life that I take a lot of pride in, that even when I take pride in something, I'm like, oh, got a hole right there. You're not as good as you think you are because you just heard the story and you're doing exactly the same thing that this person's doing. And I think hearing stories can do that. And I don't think they're necessarily shared that way for that reason, but I think it absolutely, when you brought up disaffirmation, I'm like, let me think about this for a second. Oh, yeah. Okay, yep. My values got blown out the window. I got to rethink that. And it caused me to be a better person, right? I'm like, okay, I don't want that to be in my life. I don't want to be that kind of person. So how do I change that?
Well, I mean, you saying that made me think the majority of the Bible is story. Yep. The majority of its story, and multiple times in Scripture, people use story to convey a point. You know, Nathan with David is one that comes to mind. That I actually thought of when you were saying that. I was like, you are that man. You know, Jesus used story all the time to create because when it's someone else, it's so easy to see, and so story is very powerful in that way. So other people's stories definitely help me to go, oh, okay.
Yeah, because we naturally place ourselves in the story. Whatever story we're listening to, we identify with the characters, or we may identify with a particular character. And tomorrow at church, I'm referencing the movie Inside Out. We're doing a series called Inside Out, and I haven't referenced the movie the entire series, but I'm doing it tomorrow. And one of the things that happened to me when I watched that movie in 2015 is I despised one of the emotions. I was like, why does this emotion keep messing up all the good times? And it was the emotion of sadness. Well, as I thought more and more about it, my dad had passed away 8 months earlier. And I didn't feel like I had the freedom to be sad. Partially because so many people were sad around me and looking to me for comfort. And some of that, I think, has been solidified in what I've done in ministry over the years. But even looking back on my life, I saw sadness as being weak, as being vulnerable, and I was scared. And I didn't like the idea of not being in control. And so the story from that movie, combined with my personal story of my dad passing and processing through that, and then there was also some loss of friendships during that time period that were extremely sad and grueling to go through. I had no idea that I was actually keeping myself from the support and the healing that I needed. So I've embraced it a lot more. And I'm still in process, because some of those things that happened when I was younger, I thought about my dog getting hit by a truck when I was a little boy, and I started tearing up like 2 weeks ago, and I'm like, what is going on? Like, I'm embracing sadness, and I'm like crying about something that happened when I was a 7-year-old, and it just made me think about how we're not disconnected. So that wasn't exactly the question you answered, but what I guess it did bring about for me as far as values is the importance of feeling my emotions. And that's all tangled up into the other things I've been reading and studying at this point in time in my life. And I'm thankful that I'm not doing that by myself. So
Very good.
there you go.
All right, so the last benefit to sharing your story points to the ability to find peace and hope. And everything I read referenced people who have processed their thoughts and feelings regarding their stories enough that they can share them have often come to a place of peace and hopefulness where they had none before. In a TED talk from 1022, I'm going to butcher this poor woman's last name, Ruth Tecklebe. She has a podcast called Internationally by Ruth, and she is a foreign student, and she talks a lot with other foreign students and discusses their experiences, and it's a way of forming community and letting people know that they're not alone. That's basically what her entire podcast is about, and it's a pretty successful one from what I can tell. But she says that vulnerably sharing our stories paves the way for understanding, helping us to become more comfortable discussing difficult topics. This can create awareness and challenge us to actually deal with situations outside of our comfort zone. By sharing our stories, she posits, the facade of protection eventually wears off. We learn that our stories matter, regardless of where we come from. When a lion cub is neglected in any way, another lioness in the pride will nurse the cub in an effort to help the cub survive. But male lions, they get kicked out of the pride by older males when they reach sexual maturity at about 2 years old.
Time for you to go.
Time for you to go. All right, so discuss what you think about dealing with difficult topics and situations and the facade of protection. That was where the whole lion quote came in. You're out.
Well, I think that's what everybody fears. You know, you fear that it's your time to get kicked out, but I think when you share your story and you've been vulnerable and you don't die, and I mean, seriously, like sometimes it feels like, oh my goodness, this is so scary, I might die. And then
But did you die?
But did you die? But then you don't die. And it's like, okay, well, I didn't die. So I can be vulnerable, and everybody around me didn't leave. And I'm sad for people that do have the experience of sharing their story and people do walk away. I think that that's really sad and terrible. And I know that sometimes happens. But again, they didn't die. And maybe what they learn in that situation is those weren't the people that they should be trusting and giving away their heart and their life to. So there are definitely benefits with that too, even though that's pain. It becomes part of their story that they can share the next time, But I do think that's terrible. I don't mean to minimize it at all. But I think that when you realize, okay, I've been vulnerable, The sun still comes up in the morning. The world is still spinning. And hey, I actually have some better connection with some of the people around me. It's worth it to not pretend. It's better to be honest and let that healing come, because then you really do become a better version of yourself, because you're not pretending, trying to be what you think everybody around you wants. You're able to be and offer who you were created to be, if that makes sense. So
You made me think about something else that I'm talking about tomorrow at church, and I guess it's because I've been thinking about it all week.
probably this is like preview. You guys get a preview.
Yeah.
Well, we're talking about the story of the lost, I'll say sons, plural, but the father had 2 sons, and one asked for his inheritance early and basically communicated to his father, "You're dead to me. I have no use for you anymore. Give me what you would give me if you were to die." And his father gives it to him, and he moves away, and he parties it up and loses it all. There's a famine that hits the land that he's moved to. He gets a job working at a pig farm. He finds himself desiring pig slop after, of course, having the finest. And then he comes to his senses and realizes what he had. And he goes back prepared with an apology speech. I imagine his head was hanging, and his father sees him from distance. And his father wasn't filled with anger. He wasn't filled with disgust. He wasn't filled with rage. He wasn't filled with "you owe me" type statements. Or he just ran and embraced his son, and he clothed him with the best clothes, and he gave him a ring that signify, "Hey, this you're my son." He gave him sandals for his feet, and he threw a huge party. And then the older brother, who had stayed the whole time, hears what's happening, comes home from work, asks what's going on. It's relayed to him what's happening. And instead of experiencing the joy of his brother being lost and then now being found, he's angry. And I think he was angry because he never allowed himself to be sad in the first place, because he was living removed from the heart of the Father. And for me, it's like when you don't allow yourself to get into the fullness of your own story, the past, the ugly in the past, the ugly in the present, what could happen in the future, you just don't embrace it, you're going to find yourself like that older brother who is a shell of a person and not living the abundant life. He couldn't see the reality that his father could see. He saw this small world because he was consumed with self. And I think when we talk about including other people in our stories, like we've talked about today, like you did courageously, we open ourselves up to the possibility of something so much greater and so many more parties, because we are living more fully alive. And thinking about this in terms of the lion, there's going to be more, I think, lions saved in the process. There are going to be more lions actually feeling like they have an opportunity to roar because somebody was courageous enough to roar themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think this question I wrote the most. I'm not going to go through all the red that I wrote.
You can?
But no. We'll be here all day. But I think it speaks to volume of a lot of things. I think that's the reason that TED Talks are so powerful, because you're hearing other stories most of the time. Not all of them, but the TED Talks that I think I can resonate with the most and that I've listened to have been pain. Like, okay, how does that relate to me? How can I see myself in that story? I think, you brought up 2 Corinthians where, in our weakness, God's strength is made known. I think understanding that when we're vulnerable, it's not weakness, although it feels like it at the time. Like, and it really is scary, but it's not. And then in Psalm 34:18, that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. When you understand that, when you know you're not alone, it allows for community. that I think at times when we hide behind that, what you said, the facade of protection, right? Is it facade of protection? That, when we deny telling our story, when we hide, when we do all these things, it's temporary. Sure, are you safe right this second? Yes, you're safe. No one knows your story. You can't show it, but you're not truly known. Like you're not. You're a shell of who you are, and by not opening up to other people, you're never free of hiding. You know what I mean? And I think, that protection is temporary, but real growth, real spiritual growth, real emotional growth happens when we are vulnerable and share our story with other people. And I think that's the problem with protection, or what we think is protection. We hide from that, and we miss out on the other side, or miss out on what you've now experienced on the other side. I know you've experienced it because of what's happened, even as recently as a week ago or 2 weeks ago, when people continue to talk to you. You felt freer than you felt before you shared your story. I can see a difference in you. Like, I can see a big difference already in how you operate in general. You may not see that. I see it. And I think if you always would have hid behind that protection, you never would be the person that you're becoming, or that other people can see God working in. To me, it's important to see you grow, because it is. But what I was encouraged, and you said it was weird because I was standing next to you in the lobby at church, listening to people come up and talk to you, and I'm like, this is weird. And it really was. Some of the things that were said, I was like, that's really weird. It's okay. It's just genuine reactions. But I think what was important and what we're called to do is other people saw God through you in your story. And that was, I still think about, in preparing for this, I'm like, whew, and I know that's part of preaching, it's part of sharing our story, it's part of all of that, but seeing it with someone who I know has been hiding for a long time, and seeing the benefits on the other side of that, it's pretty impactful. It really is. So.
I want to say one more thing about that. I think, going back to what you said earlier about hiding, you didn't want to be a victim or seen as a victim. On one hand, there's a lot of nobility in that. And it's almost like you want to protect people. You don't want them to feel weird or bad, or people who are even connected to you back then. How could they miss that? All those kind of questions. But it's really cool to see you step into it and realize that wasn't necessary. That God is far more capable of taking care of those people, and you're not the one that has to try to be him. So, just something that hit me when you were talking.
I don't even know. It was very impactful for me. Again, it was weird, and I was very thankful for you when that was all said and done, giving me a pass on group.
Oh,
I was like, I need to be done talking right now. I can't anymore, and I don't want to sit there and listen to people talk about me in front of me.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's a weird feeling.
But it's an interesting feeling to have people come up to me after the fact that weren't even there, that I know have watched it online, and know that the possibility of impact is ongoing, and that people might be influenced to take a step either in following Jesus or getting involved in church or something. And I was kind of, when you let me know that you shared with somebody else who's not involved in our church the link to watch the service because you thought it could have a positive impact on them. And at first I was like, what do you mean? And then I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess that's why I did it in the first place. If, it was healing for me, but if it can help other people, that's so much better. So, but weird.
Yeah, going back to Joseph, what Joseph went through and being basically thrown into a pit and sold into slavery, and then all the accusations that happened when he was part of Potiphar's household, and then getting thrown into jail after being accused of rape, and then being there for a long time, and then eventually being able to interpret the Pharaoh's dreams and becoming second in command, and then having the dream that there's going to be a famine, and able to foresee that and save Egypt and the surrounding countries from the famine that came. It's like, God used what you intended for evil for the saving of many lives. And so when I heard you talking about that, it's like what was intended for evil by the bad lion, God is going to use to save lives. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And there's going to be bridges mended between people, particularly in the area of forgiveness, whether the person is still living or not, because of your willingness to forgive as God has forgiven you.
So I have one last question, and you guys really, honestly, you don't have to. I'm going to pull a Brian. I'm going to give a question that you can take home. Anybody watching online, you guys can take this home, mull it over when you're having lunch.
Or driving in the car.
Or driving in the car, having a conversation. If you're unable to stay for small group.
with friends or family.
Small group will be at 6:43 p.m.
All right. So one last question. How can you be a lion? If you want to answer it now, you can, because this is technically our small group time.
It's hilarious.
I think the way I can be a lion is to share my story. That's how I can be a lion.
For me, I've already shared my story, and now it's out there in the interwebs land for forevermore. But for me, the whole idea of nursing a cub that might die otherwise, but knowing when to kick somebody out, and I don't think it's not a mean kicking out. It's time
to
shoo the cat, go. It's time to go make your own way. Mm-hmm. And it's not just about people you live with. That's not. Mm-hmm. But it's people who are in proximity, people who need to be encouraged to step out of their comfort zone, or people who need to be nurtured. I think for me, that's how I can grow into lionessness.
Lionessness?
Yeah. It's by really taking the time to look at individual people and say, do they need to be nurtured, or do they need to be kicked out of the pride?
And I'd say the other aspect of that, not to answer for you, is your story is not done.
Right.
The story is still being told, still being written as you live the life. So there's going to be more to share.
Hopefully good things. All good things.
I'm sure it'll be a mix.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think gut reaction is sharing as things happen. Like Brian said, stuff's not over. So being willing to be vulnerable, being willing to be courageous and share when things need to be shared, and not holding back in that self-protective or facade protective, in a facade protecting kind of way, I think is definitely part of it. But I think the nurturing piece and being a safe place where people can share their story, where they know that there is a community of people surrounding them that makes us better connected with each other, and that kind of connection isn't something to be feared, that there's real life and abundant life found in that kind of community. And really, if if the other person is a believer and follower of Jesus, it's how we show Jesus to the world around us, having that kind of unity together. And so kind of helping perpetuate unity rather than division, I think is kind of encapsulated in that nurturing piece. But also, that also requires not putting up a facade. You can't create a safe place to nurture someone who's being vulnerable if you're not being vulnerable as well. So I don't know that I answered the question. I think I picked and chose hearts. But I do like the seeing in the dark piece, and
Just kidding.
so I think thanks for the love.
Yeah, I mean, I think the same thing. I think being able to be vulnerable when I need to be with people has always been a challenge, and not just a very close select group of people around me, because that's not as hard for me as it is with people like recently. I mean, that kind of stuff is hard, and it was hard. I mean, not that it wasn't, it was absolutely worthwhile, but like being able, to your point, to be vulnerable with people and create that community, even though it's not necessarily what I would, in a bigger picture, want all the time. I think it's what we're called to do, and I think that's, to me, to be aligned. That's what I need to do more of. I need to do more of that instead of just being me in my own little world with my own little people.
So you're saying you need to be pushed?
No,
Brian, I'm not saying that. Just so we're clear on the record.
That's what I'm hearing.
All right, we're done.
All right, so on that note, I guess that's a wrap. Thank you guys for taking the time to listen and watch the podcast. And if you would, please follow us on social media, like and share the podcast. And also, if you think that this could be helpful and or entertaining for others, please share with them. We would love your specific feedback and how we can make our podcast better and provide more appropriate, beneficial content for you. So thanks again for listening, and we look forward to seeing you next time.